What's the scariest real-life paranormal experience you've lived through that no one would believe? Story 1. It was 2016, and I was about 20 or 21 at the time. My girlfriend back then lived in Otisville, New York, a small, well-known town because of its federal corrections facility. I visited her at her home very often, almost daily. She and her family used to tell me how paranormal the town was, including their own home, though I had never experienced anything myself. Their house was very close to the facility itself, literally walking distance. The prison had once been a hospital, mainly known for treating patients suffering from tuberculosis. Many of the old buildings are still there, and some of the homes were originally places where multiple patients would stay in beds while trying to recover from the illness. The house my girlfriend's family lived in was said to be haunted by a ghost, believed to be a nurse. Everyone in the family had seen her, even her father. He was a very serious man who had spent 15 years in prison earlier in his life and was now a head foreman working for a union in New York City. He told me how he came face to face with the ghost of this nurse and described how she looked just as surprised to see him as he was to see her. He said he ran to his bedroom to get to his wife and was more afraid than he had ever been in his life, and this is a man who had seen a lot in his time. One night, my girlfriend and I were driving around her small town very late, about 2 to 3 in the morning, just hanging out and talking. We eventually parked, got out of the car and started walking. This was right in the middle of the whole creepy clown craze of 2016, when videos of clowns stalking and chasing people were everywhere. We weren't too scared though. I was carrying a CO2 pellet pistol, which, looking back, was pretty dumb, just in case, especially at night. I suggested we go into the town's cemetery to explore. My girlfriend hated the idea. The cemetery was quite large and covered a lot of ground, but curiosity got the better of me. As soon as we walked in, there was a tree off to the right, and suddenly we heard a loud rumble like thunder rolling directly above us. The problem was, it was a clear night with no clouds in the sky. We brushed it off and kept walking. In the distance, maybe 150 to 200 feet away, I saw 2 glowing apparitions. They were hovering, and they looked like cliché ghosts wearing white sheets. We stared at them for a minute or two. Then slowly both figures turned around and they had glowing white eyes. They stared back at us and slowly began moving in our direction. My girlfriend got scared and stepped back, saying she wanted to leave. I told her to hold on. I wanted a better look. I took a couple of steps closer, stepping off the path and into the grass near the headstones. My girlfriend yelled at me to get back on the path. Before I even had the chance to look up again, I heard shuffling, the sound of people running. When I looked up, I saw 3 black apparitions. They had no distinct features, just pitch black bodies with limbs. They didn't make any noises, no breathing, no speaking, nothing but the sound of their bodies running toward me. I turned and bolted. As soon as I passed through the entrance gate, which was only about 15 feet away, I turned around. There was no one there. I immediately wondered if someone had been playing a prank like with the clown craze, but there was nowhere for anyone to hide. My girlfriend told me that instead of black bodies, she had seen 3 glowing white orbs moving quickly toward me, before she turned and ran. As we headed back to my car, we tried to rationalize what we had seen, but we couldn't. When we got back to my car, I drove it to the entrance and parked with the headlights shining into the cemetery. We sat there for a couple of minutes, just watching. Then, out of nowhere, we saw a small toddler run from behind one gravestone to behind another. The moment we saw that, I slammed the car into reverse and got the hell out of there. It was one of the wildest experiences of my life, and it all comes from a town rooted deeply in the history of tuberculosis in New York. Many people suffered and died from that disease, and it seems like a lot of their spirits are still around, haunting that town and its cemetery. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. Hello Reddit, I have a real story to share. I live in a 1-story house with my parents, my older brother, and at the time a dog. My room was on the first floor, right next to the stairs. My brother had his room in the attic. To get to the attic, he had to go through my room. There was no other way in or out, so I always knew when he was home. My parents had their room next to mine, so again, I always knew when they were there, especially because I would hear 2 doors open. I was about 8 to 10 years old when this started happening. My grandma, who also lived in the downstairs part of the house, died when I was 7. After that, we renovated the entire downstairs area. After everything was finished, one night I went to bed, and around 11 or 12 p.m., I started hearing footsteps going up the stairs. At the top of the stairs are 2 doors, one to my room and one to the living room. I would hear something going up, waiting at the top for a few seconds, and then most of the time going back down. I was terrified. I thought it was a one-time thing and just tried to sleep it off, but the next night it happened again, and again, and again. It kept going on for at least 1 to 2 years, I would say. One night, I gathered all my courage to open the door while the steps were around the middle of the stairs. I was lying in bed when I heard it. I got up, went to the door, and opened it. The moment my hand reached the doorknob, the steps stopped. I looked, and nothing was there. I started wondering what it could be. It couldn't be my brother. It couldn't be my parents. I had already checked both previously. My last thought was my dog, who always stayed downstairs. But we always locked the downstairs door because otherwise she would sometimes come upstairs at night. The last time it happened, I remember the steps being very fast, like a dog running up the stairs. I've never jumped up so quickly in my life. I locked the door to my room immediately, but this time I didn't hear it going back down. I just sat there waiting, and at some point, I fell asleep. I asked everyone in the house if they had ever heard or knew anything about it, but no one did. To this day, I have no idea what it was, and it still doesn't make any sense to me at all. Does anyone have any idea what it could have been? Story 3. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in central Virginia, and like most kids my age, about 10 at the time, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. One day, while exploring different deer trails, my best friend and I came across a creek. It was a rare find, and the perfect place for us to play. The creek was wide and deep enough to swim in, with soft mossy banks on either side where we could rest after tiring ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, with no copperheads and no mosquitoes since it was always flowing. We were thrilled. After a few hours of swimming, we had to head home for lunch, but we made plans to pack food the next day so we could have a picnic by the creek and spend the whole day there. The next morning, we set out for the woods at around 1 o'clock, planning to have our picnic first and swim afterward. We entered at the same spot as the day before and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It wasn't. Where we expected to find the creek, we instead walked into a small clearing, covered in tall, thick ferns. We had definitely never seen it before. Since we were both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat there. We laughed and played, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in great spirits until we packed up and started trying to find the creek again. As we walked, the woods began to feel darker and colder. We grew uneasy, and I noticed my friend kept glancing over her shoulder. After about half an hour, we came across something strange. What looked like an entire overgrown bathroom, a sink, toilet, and bathtub sat together, all covered in ivy. Finding weird things like that in the woods wasn't unheard of, so we tried to shake off the nerves and joked about it, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking without seeing anything familiar, we started to panic. At that point, we weren't even trying to find the creek anymore, just a way home, or at least out of the woods. I told her we should follow the sun and we'd eventually come across a road or someone's property where we could get help. She insisted on going another way, and soon we were yelling at each other, partly out of fear and partly out of plain stubbornness. I told her that if she thought she was so right, she could go her way, and we'd see who got out first, so we split up. Looking back now, I know that was the worst decision we could have made, stupid and stubborn in equal measure. Not 10 minutes after we separated, I started hearing footsteps about 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend changing her mind and following me, I slowed down to let her catch up. Instead, whatever it was slowed down too. I stopped. It stopped. I walked faster. It sped up. This went on for hours. The whole time, I kept second-guessing myself. Was it real or just my imagination playing tricks on me? Eventually, I picked up a big stick, tested its weight with a few swings in case I had to defend myself, and kept moving forward. As it started to get dark, I came across something that made my heart sink straight into my stomach. Bigfoot's bathroom. I had walked in a huge circle for hours, even though I was completely sure I'd been following the setting sun west the entire time. Frustrated and scared, I sat down on a log and screamed until my throat hurt, slamming my whoop-ass stick into the ground over and over. While I tried to calm down, I heard the footsteps again coming up behind me. I shouted my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. After a short pause, the footsteps started running toward me. I jumped up and ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Then came the part I rarely tell anyone. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what sounded like church bells. I looked up and saw a cloud unlike anything I've ever seen. It was enormous, the center pitch black like a hole in the sky, surrounded by swirling dark gray. Just looking at it made me feel sick, like the dizzy nausea you get when staring through binoculars too long. Then I realized the bells were coming from inside the cloud. They were deafening, booming out with a force that shook my chest. The moment I understood that, I froze. A crushing sense of dread washed over me, heavier than anything I've ever felt, even now at 24. Something deep in my mind screamed that if I didn't run right then and there, no one would ever see me again. But I didn't want to run back toward whatever had been chasing me either. So I turned sharply to the right and bolted away from both. It was completely dark now, and I was running blind through the woods, crashing through branches, wheezing and tripping every few feet. It felt like I ran for another hour before I slammed into something low and went flying over it, hitting the ground so hard that the air burst out of my lungs. As I lay there gasping, I realized the bells were gone. The woods were silent again. Once my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw what had tripped me, a fence, old and half-rotted. I grabbed onto it and prayed it would lead me somewhere safe. After following it for what felt like a mile, I came over a hill and saw the lights of a farmhouse. I walked to the back door, explained what had happened, and the farmer kindly gave me a ride home. I was covered in cuts and scrapes, bleeding and more exhausted than I'd ever been, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 o'clock when I walked through my front door. My friend had made it back shortly after we split and assumed I had too, so she hadn't told anyone I was missing. My family just thought I was still out playing after dark, which wasn't unusual for me. They were shocked when I stumbled in, crying, bruised, and bloody. No one had even realized I was gone. To this day, I still wonder how long it would have taken them to come looking for me if I hadn't found that fence and whether it would have been too late. Story 4. I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a place with the backyard bordering the woods. They worried about wild animals getting into the trash, about the dogs getting hurt, and about one of us wandering too far into the trees and getting lost. But the house was cheap. My dad liked the privacy. My mom loved how it looked, and my siblings and I were thrilled at the thought of having a forest to explore. The first sign that something wasn't right came from our dogs. They were absolutely terrified of the forest. No matter what, they refused to go past the tree line. If a toy ended up in the woods, they wouldn't fetch it, and whenever one of us went in, they would pace nervously until we came back out. Sometimes, we'd catch them staring into the forest, ears up, bodies tense, growling or barking at something we couldn't see. Once, my brother tried to carry one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing to be afraid of. She thrashed free from his arms halfway in and bolted straight back to the house, shaking and whining. If we were in the backyard around dusk, we would sometimes hear noises coming from the forest, like footsteps crunching through leaves and sticks, or branches being pushed aside. When we called out, there was never a response, but if we shined a flashlight toward the sound, every now and then we'd catch a glimpse, just for a split second, of something that looked like a person moving between the trees. After that, my parents banned us from going into the forest after dark. Even during the day, we weren't allowed to wander out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window faced the backyard and the forest beyond. She still remembers one night when she looked out and saw a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the yard. She said there was something off about it. It didn't seem to be standing fully on the ground, and it was too tall, its shape slightly distorted. She swore it was staring right at her. Terrified, she called for our dad, telling him there was a man in the yard. He grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, and she kept her eyes on the figure the whole time. It didn't move, didn't flinch. But the moment the beam of light swept over it, it was gone, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. We often heard knocking at the back door at night, but no one was ever there. At first, our parents assumed it was just local teenagers playing pranks and stopped even checking. Then one rainy night, the knocking became persistent and frantic. My mom pointed out that someone might be out there needing shelter from the storm. But when she opened the door, there was no one, and not even a single wet footprint on the porch. The knocking continued for as long as we lived there. It would happen several times over a few weeks, then stop for months, then start again. Eventually, my parents installed a security camera to catch whoever it was, but the footage never showed anyone at the door. The camera did end up capturing something else, though. About 3 years into living there, my brother began having night terrors and sleepwalking. Every time, he would head straight out the back door and start walking toward the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and rush out to stop him before he made it past the yard. After the third or fourth time, my brother asked to see the camera footage. He thought it might be funny to watch himself sleepwalking. What we saw instead was him stepping onto the porch, pausing as if listening to someone, shaking his head, and then walking forward again, but this time slowly, like he was being pulled or led by something we couldn't see. One evening, my dad was in the backyard when he heard my sister calling to him from the forest, her voice sounding panicked and distressed. Thinking she'd gone exploring, fallen, and hurt herself, he ran into the trees, calling back to her. But as he went deeper, he realized it was too dark to see and he couldn't tell where her voice was coming from. He told her to stay put while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for it, he found my sister sitting inside, completely fine and unaware of what had just happened. At the time, my dad didn't tell us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest. So months later, when I was outside with the dogs one evening and heard my mom calling to me from the woods, I didn't question it. I'd seen her inside earlier, but somehow it didn't register that she couldn't have gotten past me without me noticing. Her voice sounded close, She said her sweater had gotten caught on some branches and she needed me to come help her. I started walking toward the trees. The dogs immediately began barking and growling, which caught my dad's attention. He looked out the window, saw me heading into the forest, and came running outside. When he shouted at me, I yelled back that I was just helping Mom. He yelled even louder that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house right then. I didn't hesitate. I turned and sprinted back, the dogs still barking like crazy behind me. After that incident, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence going up and us actually moving out, everything got worse. We started hearing knocking at the back door more regularly, along with tapping on the windows, like someone was circling the house and trying each one. There were constant scratching and scraping noises on the fence at night, and sometimes we heard voices just beyond it. My brother's night terrors became more frequent. One night, my mom didn't hear the door open, and he ended up sleepwalking outside. He woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest, with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after moving in, we woke up to find the back door standing wide open. The security camera footage showed it slowly swinging open on its own. Since we moved out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and struggles with severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue. After some small talk, he asked if I thought the door opening that final night meant whatever was out there had finally gotten in. He tried to make light of it, joking about getting into the Halloween spirit, saying maybe we should all get exercised just in case something latched onto us. But I could tell he was serious underneath the humor. I know I still am. I get nervous around dark, wooded areas even now. I don't know what was in the forest behind our house at night, but I do know this. It felt like if it had the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. Story 5. I'm begging someone to please give their thoughts on what kind of spirit this could possibly be. For convenience, I'm going to go in order. This post will include not only my own stories, but also things experienced by others in this house before I was born. Backstory of my house. The first floor is old. It's the original house, which belonged to an elderly couple before us. The wife even had her funeral in this house. The second floor was built by my grandparents after they bought it. My mama also passed away in this house. In the first floor guest room. Encounters before I was born. My dad was sitting on the toilet, smoking a cigarette out the window, when he heard a voice say, "Put it out." He threw the cigarette out the window and ran out of the bathroom. No one was around. My papa was sleeping on the couch when he woke up and saw smoke filling the house. He jumped up thinking the house was on fire, but as soon as he stood, the smoke was completely gone. My mama once saw the reflection of a little girl standing beside her in the bathroom mirror. My personal encounters. One night, I was half asleep in my room, facing away from the door when I heard it slam shut. I jumped up and ran downstairs to ask who had slammed my door. Only my papa and uncle were home, and they both looked genuinely confused but said they had heard it too. I wrote it off as me being half asleep until the next morning. When I looked at my door in daylight, there was a hole in it. I opened the door all the way, and the hole lined up perfectly with the corner of my dresser. Another time, my friends and I were having a sleepover when we heard someone outside dragging chains across my backyard. We checked, but no one was there. This next story happened to me and my mother at the same time, so I'll give both perspectives. My POV. I went to bed early and closed my door behind me, leaving it unlocked because my papa sometimes peeked in to check on me or say goodnight if I was awake. My mom's POV. She was sleeping in the family room, which is an open space right at the bottom of the stairs. She heard my bedroom door open, then my footsteps coming down the steps and into the living room. She heard me walk around for a while before going back upstairs to my room. Her back was turned the entire time, so she never looked. A few minutes later, she heard my door open again, and my footsteps coming halfway down the stairs before stopping. She called my name, asking why I was just standing there. She then heard the footsteps turn around on the stairs, go back into my room, and the door shut again. My POV. I hardly ever have a night where I don't wake up at least once, but one night I slept through the entire night. When I woke up and went to open my door, I saw it was locked. My room only locks from the inside, so I was completely confused. I knew I had left it cracked open for the reason I mentioned earlier. When I went downstairs, my mom asked me what I had been doing that night. I was baffled, and she told me everything I had just described to you. Bonus story. My boyfriend and I were in my room when we both heard a loud noise, yet we each heard it coming from opposite directions, even though it was clearly the same sound. At first, we thought one of us had made it, but the way we each heard it from the other side made that impossible. We were both genuinely freaked out, which convinced me neither of us was playing around. There have been other strange occurrences too. Dogs staring and barking at nothing, unexplained voices, odd noises, the usual things you hear about in haunted houses. No one has ever been physically harmed or touched, and I personally have never seen anything in a tangible form. Story 6. This happened when I was a kid, but I remember it very clearly. I've read enough about shadow people to know that what I saw has been encountered by others, but there was a third entity that still creeps me out whenever I think about it. I'm hoping someone might know more about this particular one. I grew up in a smaller house when I was in 3rd grade. From the living room, you could see through the dining room and into the kitchen, which was probably about 20 feet away. The kitchen was L-shaped, and the short leg of the L wrapped around a door leading down into the basement. That part of the kitchen couldn't be seen from the living room. It wasn't uncommon for me to fall asleep in the living room instead of going to my room at night, especially during the summer, and this was one of those nights. My mom and I had fallen asleep together, lying on opposite sides of the couch. I woke up in the middle of the night, and from where I was lying on the couch, I could see 2 figures pacing back and forth in the kitchen. They looked like they were wearing robes or some sort of heavy encompassing clothing. One was completely white, and the other was a dull gray. They moved rhythmically, walking from the visible portion of the L-shaped kitchen into the part hidden by the basement door. Every so often, one of them would pause, turning slightly as if it were looking straight at me, before resuming its silent pacing. At that age, of course, I was terrified, frozen with fear, but unable to look away. I remember reaching over to shake my mom awake, seeing her head shift slightly in the dark, but no matter how hard I tried, she wouldn't wake up. So I just sat there, staring, my heart pounding, watching them for what felt like at least 10 minutes. Now here's the part I still can't make sense of, and I feel a little dumb even saying it. But alongside the shadow people, there was a small being I can only describe as some sort of chubby, turkey-like spirit. It was rocking back and forth, facing me directly. Unlike the 2 shadow figures, it stayed in the same spot while they paced behind it. Eventually, the shadow people moved into the hidden portion of the kitchen, and the butterball turkey faded out of view. I was then able to wake my mom up, and everything stopped. Even now, I can picture all of them perfectly in my mind, especially that strange little being. Does anyone have any idea what I might have seen? Story 7. I grew up in rural Oklahoma. Our property was surrounded by woods, with an open field at the front and my nearest neighbor about a quarter-mile away. When I was in high school, my parents built me a small, separate bedroom outside the main house, basically a 10-by-10 barn-style room with a simple latch on the outside. I could open it from the inside using a bit of wire. One night, sometime between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., I was lying in bed when the latch on my door started rattling. This wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, steady movement, like someone was trying to get in. The latch was about 3 feet off the ground, so it couldn't have been a small animal. And if it had been a person, the door was so easy to open they could have just walked right in. The rattling went on for a few minutes, my heart pounding harder with every second. Finally, I grabbed my shotgun and racked it. The sound was loud enough to carry outside, and the moment I did, the rattling stopped, dead silent. Whoever or whatever it was froze the instant they heard it. There were no vehicles on our gravel driveway. You could hear them clearly from inside. No kids or pranksters anywhere nearby, and the only people who lived close were my grandparents and an older neighbor. Between my room and the house stood another outbuilding without a door at the time, and from the back door of the main house you could see my room clearly. I even had a motion sensor lamp above my door, but it stayed on almost constantly, so the entrance was always lit. I also had an old security camera mounted outside facing the door, but it wasn't connected to anything at the time, so nothing was recorded. To this day, I still don't know what was out there. All I know is that the moment I racked that shotgun, the noise stopped, and whatever it was seemed to vanish into the night. It still gives me chills thinking about it. Has anyone else experienced something like this in the middle of nowhere? What do you think it could have been? Story 8. My daughter follows this sub, and when I told her this story, she said I should post it here. Tooties, if you're reading this, I did it. When I was 18 years old, I was dating someone who still lived at home with his family. One night they went out to run errands and asked if I wanted to come along. I said no and stayed behind. I'm pretty sure I had been alone in the house before, but usually I stayed in his room, which was kind of an offshoot from the rest of the house. This time though, I decided to hang out in the family living room. I was watching something on television when, like in every other paranormal story, I suddenly felt an intense, unmistakable sense that I was being watched. Normally, someone could be staring at me from 2 feet away and I wouldn't even notice. I'm a total space cadet. But this felt different. It wasn't just that someone might be looking at me, it was intentional. Whoever or whatever it was wanted me to know I was being fixated on. It went beyond just eyes from across a room. I froze for a second, sitting there with that feeling, waiting for it to go away. I was trying to make sense of what was happening, but it was undeniable. Before I could even fully form the thought that this might be something paranormal, I suddenly, in my biggest, strongest voice, shouted, "Leave me alone!" It wasn't planned. It felt like a compulsion, rising from my chest and forcing its way out of my mouth. And it did leave me alone. I felt immediate relief. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was nervous. One part of me confused, the other part not at all. I started debating whether I should go into my boyfriend's room. That thought lasted maybe 2 seconds before the television turned off on its own. I remember thinking I couldn't believe this was happening and how cliché it felt. Then the television turned back on, and the channels began flipping rapidly. I sat there, eyes glued to the screen, as it stopped and stopped on Children of the Corn. The movie was just beginning. That film had terrified me as a child. I had grown up across from a cornfield, and I first caught the movie late at night when my dad had fallen asleep, and the R-rated movies came on. I spent many years genuinely scared of it. So now I was actually afraid, and I had completely accepted that there was a ghost messing with me in my boyfriend's parents' living room. I desperately tried to turn the television off, but it wouldn't turn off. I used my big voice again and told it to stop. It did. I shut the television off and went to my boyfriend's room. Looking back, I'm not sure how I handled it so well, but I remember feeling that I absolutely had to stay calm. Later that night, I told my boyfriend something weird had happened in the living room and that I thought it was a ghost. I felt embarrassed. He casually replied that, yeah, his mom thinks the house is haunted. After that, I mostly let it go, because for about a month, nothing happened again. And really, I should explain, while it was scary, I wasn't actually afraid of it. I realized it was trying to scare me. Sure, it made me sweat and my heart race, but I didn't feel like something truly bad was happening. One night, my best friend Tara slept over. My boyfriend had a couch in his room, and above his bed were long fluorescent tube lights. My boyfriend was out, and Tara and I had smoked a bunch of weed. We both fell asleep. Tara on the couch, me on the bed. The TV and lights were off. Hours later, I woke up and noticed the TV was on, an old square box TV, but the tint was pink. I looked up, and the fluorescent bulb above the bed was the same pink. I told myself I was either really high or it was the ghost. I woke Tara up and said, "Dude, what color is the TV?" She said it was pink. I asked what color the light was. She said that's pink too. This seemed to wake her up a little more. She asked me what the hell was going on, so I explained that some weird stuff had happened in the living room last month, and that I thought there was a ghost in the house. She told me she was too high to process all that and went back to sleep. I did too. Nothing ever really happened again, at least that I can remember. My boyfriend and I eventually broke up, and his family moved. This all took place in upstate New York. I never talked to his mom about it. I really only told a few people, including my daughter. It's just the kind of thing that's hard to explain. I told my daughter because recently the television kept turning on randomly, which reminded me of that experience. We eventually figured out it was just Bixby. Haha. For a moment, I thought I was being haunted again. I will say this, I never had another experience like that, and I believe my ex's mom when she said the house was haunted. Story 9. This is a story about some strange things that happened to my family and friends when we stayed at an Airbnb this past June. I still think about those experiences months later. Most of what happened revolved around me and my friends, who I'll call H and A. We spent a few days at a rental home by the ocean along the Pacific coast. It was actually our second time staying at this specific house. The first was back in June of 2021. Nothing particularly strange happened during that first visit until the final evening, but I'll get into that later. This time, we were there for a total of 3 full days, not counting travel days. And it wasn't until the last full day that AH and I started to talk about some odd experiences we'd been having. My parents were with us too, but we kept them out of it because they don't really like talking about this kind of stuff. The house had 3 bedrooms. H had 1 room, A had another. My parents had the 3rd, and I was sleeping on the pull-out bed in the living room. On the final evening of our visit, HA and I were sitting in the hot tub on the deck when we started talking about some strange sounds the two of them had been hearing in their rooms. H mentioned that, overnight, he thought he had heard drum-like sounds coming from the corner of his room, even though there was nothing there that could have made those noises. Shazlik added that she had heard someone knocking on one of the locked doors in her room the same night. There are a number of locked doors in the property, which is, of course, normal for rentals. Keep in mind that we were basically in the middle of nowhere by the ocean, so it was practically dead silent around the house at night. Hetz also revealed that he had 4 scratches on his backside, which he showed me. I know this sub is sensitive about mentioning body scratches, so I hope that's okay. He had first noticed them earlier in the day, thinking he had gotten sunburned, but realized he was feeling scratches instead. They had not been there before, and he hadn't done anything that could have caused them. I had noticed something strange myself during the nights I slept in the living room. Across from where I was sleeping, there was another locked door. Each night, as I lay in bed and looked over at it, I saw light coming from under the door as if a light had been turned on in the room behind it. During the day, though, it was completely dark under that door, just like the other locked doors in the house. I know this because on the morning we were leaving, I crouched down and looked under it. No light at all. But at night, without ever seeing it turn on, there would be light glowing from behind that door. Even stranger, H's scratches disappeared the morning we headed out, as if they had never been there, and he didn't feel a thing. All in all, it was a fun trip, and we did plenty of cool things during those 3 days. But I can't help thinking about the other unexplainable things we experienced and discussed at the end. About our first time at that house 4 years ago. Like I said before, nothing really happened until the last night. Back then, I was sleeping in the room that A stayed in this time. On that final night, I heard what sounded like an ominous marching drum beat echoing from somewhere inland, away from the direction of the ocean. I looked out my window to see if I could spot anything, but it was pitch dark out there. Like I mentioned, we were miles from any kind of civilization, and it was truly black all around the house at night. Nobody should have been out there. Even now, 4 years later, I still remember exactly what I heard. So anyway, that's that. I just thought I'd post about it here because it's been on my mind these last few months after our recent trip. If anyone has any input or thoughts, please feel free to share. Story 10. Hi all. I'm writing to see if anyone has had similar experiences to mine or can help provide some clarity. I grew up in northern Michigan in a house built sometime between 1900 and 1905. I've never been able to find any record of deaths or anything unusual happening on the property. But here are a few things that happened to me as a kid that I still wonder about, whether they were paranormal or just coincidences. 1. Shadow people. When I was about 8 years old, and this lasted until I was about 10, I would see shadow people every night. They were totally silent, about 8 feet tall, and didn't seem to be there to scare me. They would just walk around my room. I shared a room with my older brother, but he never saw anything. That's how I knew, even then, that they weren't real in the normal sense. Still, it was terrifying. What made it even scarier was that when I closed my eyes, I would get what felt like a vivid video playing in my head. In this vision, I was sitting at a bar looking at a staircase leading down to a basement, basically a speakeasy. A figure would start walking down the stairs, but I could only see its shadow. I would always have to open my eyes before the figure reached the bottom of the stairs because I knew it was the devil. That repeating vision was scarier to me than the shadow people themselves. Whenever I opened and closed my eyes, the scene would just reset and start from the beginning. On top of that, whenever I looked away from the center of my room where the shadow people were, I would hallucinate bugs and spiders crawling up my sheets toward me. I eventually got used to it, but I've never been able to reconcile just how vivid and detailed those visions and hallucinations were. 2. Bats in the house were very common. Bats were my mom's worst fear, and every year, sometimes multiple times a year, companies came out to inspect our home. Each time, they said there were no entry points, nothing in the attic, everything was fine, and there was no reason bats should be getting inside. We were very diligent about closing windows and doors in the evenings. Despite nothing being in the attic, I would hear scratching in the wall against which my bed was placed several times a week. 3. I was a very sensitive child emotionally. I'm not sure if that's what people mean when they say they can see or hear spirits, but maybe I had that or something similar. Sometimes when I felt something near me, I would test it by asking it to open the door or make a noise, and a lot of the time it actually worked. One time I was using the bathroom with the door cracked, and because I felt it there, I asked it to open the door. The door randomly opened about 6 inches. I remember thinking, I should really be way more scared than I am right now. Another time, as I was leaving the upstairs bathroom in the middle of the night, I saw a gross-looking leg from the knee to the foot, finishing walking around the corner. I told my parents about it the next day, and they said, "Oh yeah, the kids." I replied, "No, everyone was asleep upstairs, and this was a gross-looking leg." They said, "No, that's just what we call them. We believe you." I didn't press them on it because I didn't understand. I was maybe about 10 years old at the time. There are multiple other things I could talk about, but I don't want this to be too long. Please feel free to ask anything. I just want to know if there's some sort of logical explanation or if the house could have actually been haunted. Thanks in advance for your input. Story 11. Hi everyone, I just wanted to share this story from a couple of years ago. Sorry if this isn't the right place for it, and sorry if my formatting is off. This is my first ever Reddit post. This happened during my 8th grade year at my small middle school. For size reference, my graduating class was about 125 students. Our school was really old, and there were rumors that someone had passed away there at one point, though I could find no records to confirm it. My friend and I were messing around in the old, unused gym near the end of the school year and decided to explore a dark section under the bleachers. For context, it was a small hallway with two little doorways on the right and a locked door leading to an old locker room at the end. The light didn't work because the bulbs had blown out, so it was completely dark and we had no flashlights. Phones weren't allowed. The air was cold, musty, and smelled like mold, but that wasn't unusual for my school, honestly. Our plan was to enter the hallway and go through the first door on the right, which had a mirror inside. We were bored, looking for something to do, and it seemed like the perfect plan. Interesting and kind of creepy. We had just stepped far enough into the hallway that it was starting to get hard to see when I heard a chuckle in my own voice. It seemed to come from the right, near the door to the room with the mirror, but I figured maybe it had just echoed from somewhere else. I didn't think it could have been my friend. His voice was much deeper than mine, but when I looked at him, he was already staring at me with a questioning look. I shook my head at him, and then we heard it again. That was enough. We bolted out of there, and I've never been able to forget it since. I can still remember that exact chuckle, my exact voice, the same sound both times. I do believe in paranormal beings, but I've still tried to rationalize this experience. It couldn't have been someone else. My friend and I were standing at the only entrance for a while, and no one else had gone in. We'd been in the gym for a while before entering the hallway, and the hallway itself only had one way in and out. We were right at the entrance the entire time. There wasn't any stereotypical "we never spoke of it again" moment. We've talked about it several times since, and to this day we still have no idea what could have happened. That's why I'm here. I've had some other paranormal experiences, but I don't believe they're related to this one. I do have a history of mental health issues, but none that cause hallucinations. The closest thing I experience is visual snow, and no psychiatric disorders that cause hallucinations run in my family. If anyone has any ideas or theories, I'd love to hear them. Story 12. I really don't know how to explain this, but it happened a few months ago. I live with my parents in a two-story house on the edge of town, near open fields. It's usually very quiet at night. The veranda outside my room on the first floor overlooks our backyard and a few neighboring houses. On nights like this, I can hear the faint rustling of leaves, distant dogs barking, and sometimes nothing at all. It was around 1:35 a.m. when it started. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it. A soft, almost melodic tune, completely unfamiliar. At first, I thought maybe someone was walking down the street humming, but the sound didn't seem to come from the street. It felt like it was being carried on the wind, fading in and out every few seconds. It wasn't calling my name or anyone else's. It was just a voice or a sound as if it were trying to reach me. There was something magnetic about it, and I felt compelled to go outside. I don't know why. Maybe to check. Maybe to see who or what it was. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake my parents. The soft whirring of the fan only made the stillness more noticeable. I walked to the veranda, reached for the door, and pulled on the handle. Nothing. I tried again. Still jammed. It was unusual for the door to be stuck, but something about it felt intentional, like something was trying to stop me from going outside. My mind screamed at me to step back. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me, heavy and suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened. I let go of the handle and stumbled back into my room. The voice didn't stop. It hovered outside, calling softly. It almost sounded insistent. I lay in bed, trying to convince myself it was just a dream, but the voice was too precise, too deliberate. And then, all at once, it stopped. Not gradually, like fading away, but abruptly, like someone had hit pause on a song. I stayed awake the entire night, listening for anything. The rustling of leaves, footsteps, that same soft calling, but nothing came. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. I'm still confused. Was I having auditory hallucinations, or was this all real? Story 13. I've never shared this anywhere before until today, and I hate recounting it because it genuinely messed me up for a while. I fully expect to be called a liar, and honestly, I'm not sure I would believe it if I hadn't been there myself. I probably would have thought I was insane if I had been the only witness. At the time, I was working at a nursing home as a CNA on night shifts. I had one other CNA as my partner and a nurse on duty. They were the only other staff. We had just finished our rounds and all the residents were asleep or at least in bed. My coworkers and I decided to play cards for a bit until someone needed something or it was time for our next rounds. We set up in the dining room near the serving window, which had a heavy wooden door that latched shut. The lights in the kitchen were on, and the door was crooked on its hinges, leaving a gap at the bottom. I thought I saw a figure walk past and laughed, assuming it was a resident with the munchies looking for a midnight snack, which happened from time to time. I told my coworkers I was going to check it out. I went into the kitchen, but no one was there. A pit formed in my stomach as I walked around the counter and peeked into the pantry, but still saw no one. I shrugged it off, turned off the kitchen light, and as soon as the door swung shut behind me, we heard one huge loud bang like a construction site or a massive clap of thunder that loud. Against every instinct I had, and out of concern for the residents, I carefully opened the door and turned the light back on. Every single door in that kitchen was open. Every cabinet, every drawer, the fridges, the ovens, the dishwasher, even the microwave, everything that could possibly be opened. We just looked at each other, silently shut everything back up, and then sat on the same couch in the TV room watching Cartoon Network until our next rounds. The next morning, we asked the residents if they had heard anything, but not a single person did. It had been loud enough to rattle the doors. It would have been impossible for it to go unnoticed, even if most were sleeping, and I know at least a few were awake. Nursing homes are, of course, a hotbed for death, sorrow, and negativity, especially the one I worked at. Awful, hazardous conditions, no support from administration, drunk and neglectful nurses, you name it. A few of us seemed to be the only ones who truly cared. We bought residents' toiletries and treats with our own money. We filed report after report, and no one seemed to care. Many residents were former drug users or alcoholics on hospice, and some elderly people had families who never visited. I wouldn't be surprised if more than one poor soul was trapped and angry in that place. I only stayed for my residents, and after this experience, I couldn't do it anymore. Sorry for the tangent, but feel free to ask questions. I'm an open book and interested in hearing opinions or feedback about what I went through. Story 14. I've only experienced certain things in certain houses, which is why I don't believe it's sleep paralysis. The first paranormal or strange experience I remember happened when I was around 5 to 7 years old. I visited my dad's house on weekends and had my own room there. Eventually, a couple of roommates moved into my room since my sister and I only stayed a few weekends here and there. During that time, I had one particular experience. I was awake. I've always had insomnia and sleep issues, and my younger sister was asleep in her room on the second story. I heard sounds as if two people were messing with the window above the headboard of my bed. I pulled the cover over my sister and myself, and remember how hard I struggled to keep us both still and hidden under the blanket. I then heard people come into the room from the window, even though that should have been impossible. I heard them shuffle into the closet before going downstairs. When I finally pulled the covers back, I could hear pots and pans banging in the kitchen. The sun had already risen. It was early morning, and I hoped my parents were downstairs. But when I went to their room, they were still asleep. They dismissed everything I had experienced that night as just a dream. Then they moved to a really old house, from the 1920s or 30s if I recall correctly. It started with extreme fear at night when my stepmom moved her mother's childhood dolls into my room. One time, in the middle of the day, my closet door, which housed these dolls that terrified me and which I always made sure was shut tight, pushed itself open. Things continued to escalate. I would feel a pressure on my chest or throat, struggle to breathe, and experience a deep sense of dread. Eventually, that stopped. One night, when I was a teenager, I woke up to a green light shining through my window. I heard a woman's voice and assumed it was my stepmom and that I had overslept. I went to the den outside my room, but it was pitch black, and the woman's voice had stopped. I went back to bed, terrified. I told my sister about these experiences at the new house. Her room was on the opposite side of the house from mine. She said she would hear water running from the bathroom sink, but when she checked, no one was there and the water wasn't running. She felt as if someone was watching her through her window, sometimes even tapping on it. Outside her window was fenced in with a locked gate. She also heard footsteps running through the hallways when no one was awake. I used to think my dad just had bad luck picking houses. Then I moved in with my Grammy, and now my experiences have changed. One night, the first time it happened, I woke up and it felt like my brain, my body, and even my skin were buzzing with electricity. At the time, it seemed strange but not terrifying. Now it feels like nothing unusual, at least to me, just odd. But this morning, I woke up to the same feeling. Only this time, I could sense someone in my room. I heard breathing, and it wasn't my own. I could just feel its presence. I controlled myself, pretending to be asleep, and inched my hand toward my nightstand, planning what to grab to defend myself. When I'm asleep, I don't think like this. I could explain away some of the things at my dad's house as weird dreams or even sleep paralysis, even the first experience at my Grammy's. But the fact that during my most recent one, I could move, think clearly, and act methodically, and the green light and woman's voice experience at my dad's, those make me really believe I've experienced something paranormal. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.